Hello. Hello. If you are joining us, I think people are just coming in from the waiting room. So we'll just give people a minute or so to come in. Looking forward to our short, sharp, sweet session this lunchtime. This is part of our cost of living activities. So you may have come to some of our cost of living week sessions a month or so ago. You may have looked at our cost of living hub on the website. I'm sure Milena can drop in links to all of those things. You may have read our cost of living survey report that we did with members, and today is our cost of living day of action. So what we're doing today is really focusing on the actions that people are taking in terms, what can funders do? What are funders already doing, and how can we join forces to support Londoners? So we've got 4 online sessions today. You may have come to the London Living Wage session earlier. You might be coming to the advice session shortly after this one. And there will be all sorts of stuff going on social media, and I think Milena can drop the link into the chat if you're tweeting or any of those kinds of things. But for now, we are talking about the impact on migrants of the cost of living. So we know that migrants are facing, of all the challenges faced by London, migrants have that plus all sorts of other challenges. The cost of living is meaning that they are more at risk of being exploited. They are likely to be harder impacted than other groups. So we wanted to talk a bit about what some funders are doing. So I'm delighted to be joined today by Esther and Susan, who are both working in the GLA social integration team, but are actually both seconded into the GLA from civil society organisations. So Esther from the Eastern European Centre, Resource Centre, and Susan from Kanlungan Filipino Consortium. So you've got 2 real experts here today. Their secondment is through the Citizenship and Integration Initiative, which is a pooled fund run by Trust for London. Just a bit of background there. But I'm going to hand over to Esther to tell us a bit about what are the issues here, Esther, and what can we do about them?
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Geraldine, for such a kind introduction. I'm just going to share a slideshow. And Geraldine, can you give me a thumbs up if you can see it? Wonderful. Great. So as Geraldine said, we're going to talk a bit about what funders can do to support migrants through the cost of living crisis. First, I'm going to talk a bit why migrants might be more at risk in this situation, and then about the sector, then some kind of open advice for what funders might do, and finally what the GLA is doing and how you can contact us. Okay, so first of all, why migrants might be more at risk. And I'd like to preface this with quite a significant caveat that there's quite a lot of variation between different individuals, but also different communities and between different statuses. It's a very complicated system with a lot of people in it. That being said, in general, in the UK, migrants are more likely than a British-born population to be in low-paid and precarious employment. By precarious employment, we mean what you might think, like casual or cash-in-hand work, definitely. But we also mean things like 0 hours contracts, agency work, being self-employed sometimes is very precarious, and also temporary contracts. Migrants are also more likely to be underemployed for their experience and qualifications. And sorry, my cat is just, as ever, trying to be a part of the webinar, so apologies for that. And they're more disproportionately working in sectors where exploitation is more prevalent. So migrants in the UK are getting less money and income, and it's less predictable. They have the same outgoings as everyone, you know, for food and family and work. But there are additional outgoings that migrants in the UK very often have. The UK immigration system is extremely expensive. It's one of the most expensive in the world. If you're on a visa, for example, it might cost you around £2,500 every 2.5 years to make your visa renewal and pay the NHS surcharge. And on that basis, a family of 4 on the 10-year route to settlement can expect to pay in excess of £50,000 to gain indefinite leave to remain. So, you know, for anyone new to thinking about working with migrants in the UK, it's really important to see how expensive it is to be in the UK in the first place. In this context, it's unsurprising that many migrants will struggle to keep savings or accrue assets, both financially but also for structural reasons, to manage in hard times. And when hard times do come, like the cost of living crisis or COVID or Brexit, all of them stacking up as they have been, there's very little buffer. Plus, without personal buffers, migrants then also have a much more limited access to the state safety net. This is often intentional. Sometimes it's around eligibility. For example, lots of people in the UK have visas that say they have no recourse to public funds, which limits your access to benefits and healthcare and other things, or eligibility based around residence and other, you know, other systems. Even if you're eligible, a migrant might not be aware of what they have access to. It can be a very different system and very complicated. And even if you're aware and eligible, it can be really difficult to access the advice and support you need to genuinely then access that safety net. So in this context, the sector that supports migrants in the UK is extremely important. It's a really diverse sector, and do you know, I'm so proud to be a part of it and endlessly amazed by the individuals, by the communities, by the volunteers, by the staff, the organisations and the funders, of course, also in the sort of extraordinary resourcefulness and commitment. When I say diverse, I mean that some organisations, frontline organisations will be working with all migrants in one geographical area, like Hackney or Haringey Migrant Centre. Some will be working with one community or a group of communities, like East European Resource Centre or Susan with Colungan. And others will be working with groups of migrants that share particular characteristics or even share particular conditions or status, like the Anti-Trafficking and Labour Exploitation Unit, which supports survivors of trafficking. In this huge diversity, the majority, however, are functioning with very modest budgets. 97% have an income under £1 million a year, and 67% are under 100,000 a year, pounds. So these are quite small budgets for organisations that are doing a huge amount of very important work for a lot of people. And these organisations, and really now I'm speaking from my work at the East European Resource Centre and with colleagues in other organisations, but these organisations are really feeling inflationary pressures as they intersect with the hostile environment and with other external circumstances. We're seeing a massive increase in demand, and not surprisingly, that is especially around housing and homelessness, debt, poverty and benefits, and various types of exploitation and abuse. This is hard enough, but as employers and as organisations, we are struggling to keep up with inflation. It is very difficult when we have fixed incomes based on grants already agreed, or based on donations that we, that don't keep up with inflation. It's very, very difficult to increase staff salaries with inflation. And staff salaries in the advice sector, and definitely in the migrant community sectors, they're not, you know, hugely high already. Many organisations, I notice, are using part-time and short-term contracts to cope with the instability and with the kind of salary pressure. Understandably, this and the challenging external circumstances are producing lowered morale and people leaving the sector. And this is a really important drain of expertise and capacity when we need it most, and when it's most difficult to recruit and train new staff. So, gosh, what a difficult situation with some amazing people working in it. What's my advice for funders? And I want to say this comes in the most open and generous manner. I'm a trustee for a grant making trust, and also, you know, the GLA in a way is a funder is also a funder, and I understand the constraints and levers that funders have and face. That being said, if in an ideal world, this is what I would advise. I would advise you to expect increases in current and new grants in line with inflation. And because of the big power difference between grant funders and the migrant and the community sector, I would advise you to proactively welcome and articulate your welcome of those increases. I'd advise you to fund core costs in an extremely difficult environment. This provides extremely valuable stability, and it enables responsive work when we need to do it. If you can't fund core costs because of because of the way your board makes decisions, or because of the constraints on your pot of money, then I would advise you to consider funding projects more flexibly and taking in the holistic needs of migrant groups who are facing lots of different issues left, right and centre. I would advise you to welcome applicants or applications even from organisations or communities new to you. This we know is best practice in terms of improving how equally accessible grant funding is, but it's especially important in the migration sector at the moment, because the communities that need support are changing. And so we have some small organisations who have been supporting small communities who are now still small organisations supporting much bigger communities. So I'm thinking about those supporting Hong Kongers, Afghan people, Ukrainians, and Albanians. We've seen a lot of that, a lot in the news recently. Yeah, and what does it really mean to welcome new applications? So thinking about how accessible your application system is and how able you are to assess applications from organisations that are not used to making applications to grant funders. It's good to be reflective on that. Finally, when thinking about the migration sector, I would say crisis funding is extremely welcome in a crisis, for sure. But long-term continuity funding is essential. During COVID, I think we learned quite a lot about that, where we had an awful lot of crisis funding and then a bit of a cliff edge at the end of it. So I would sort of counsel that we should try and avoid that cliff edge in cost of living. Quite strange to be talking about one crisis after another, but here we are. Then the final piece of advice I have is perhaps the hardest to operationalise, but I think it's important to say the migration sector can't support all migrant people, communities by ourselves. We need mainstream organisations to collaborate with us and to be inclusive of, migrant people. And I would advise that funders, when funding mainstream organisations that should be available to everyone, that you encourage them to apply, and you to apply when assessing them, a kind of migration informed lens. By this I mean, how can this service or this project or this organisation be equally accessible to migrants as it is to people born in Britain? So for example, you know, are interpreters included in the budget? How do, is immigration advice a part of it? Or can other advice be given taking into account the various immigration statuses of advice? This might not be something that all these mainstream organisations can do right now with this grant. So if not, you know, are they moving to a place where they can, and how could they be? And how as funders could we support them to do so? Okay, I'm going to stop very shortly to make sure there's enough time for questions, but to say some things that the GLA is doing in case you're interested in getting in touch with us about them. The GLA has just made £4 million available in invested, has, oh, sorry, losing my train of thought, has invested £4 million extra in financial and welfare advice. Susan and I will be sitting on the advisory board for a portion of this to bring the migration lens to it. We're also supporting training and development of the advice sector and understanding and research into understanding the kind of true capacity, supply, demand, experience of the advice sector. And Susan and I are focusing on employment rights and exploitation in that. The Mayor also has a Warmer Homes programme, which is offering grants for low-income Londoners to improve their homes and make them more efficient and, crucially, cheaper to heat. And we have several resources which are extremely user-friendly: a cost of living hub, a migrant Londoners hub, an employment rights hub. The latter two of those are available in many, many, many languages. Okay. Whew. There's some references there, and please do feel free to get in touch with Susan and I if you're interested in collaborating, or you're just starting out thinking about this and want to hear more than a 10-minute quick whistle-stop tour through. And now I think we'll take questions.
Yes, brilliant. Thank you, Esther. Really, really good overview of the risks, the increased risks for migrants, what funders can do about that, and what the GLA is doing. If you do have questions for Esther and Susan, please use the Q&A box. I can see we've got a really practical one about can we share the slides? Yes, I hope that's a yes. That would be brilliant. Well, I certainly have some questions. So in terms of the, I know that you're doing some really practical work. You're thinking about how you can do practical work with the advice sector to enable them to understand the issues that are facing migrants when they come through the door around migrant worker exploitation. Susan, do you want to say a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I just wanted to add quickly also that the GLA is doing quite a lot of work with homeless people and rough sleepers. So just to add a little bit to the practical things that GLA is doing, you know, kind of corporate level. And in relation to the work that Esther and I are trying to put together for the next, hopefully, few months, it is about really practical support to many organizations who are underrepresented and probably mostly will be dealing with communities who are organizations run and by people who have lived experience in their communities, where they will be given training in order to be able to really do very good holistic support and advice around employment issues, because we know that the intersection of employment issues and exploitation and migration is very difficult and very complicated. And it's always an issue that many migrants experience because they will be exploited in the world of works, and the tension between going after the unpaid wages, the discrimination, the lack of proper pay in terms of minimum wage, or in relation to not being paid sick pay or holiday pay, and all that are always being set aside because of the precarity of their immigration status. So we want to be able to ensure and all support, an X number of advisors around this issue so that they could still think about addressing these two issues of employment exploitation and the immigration issues at the same time, and not sacrificing one against the other. So hopefully we will be able to provide a kind of training to be able to do this, quite kind of bespoke training, and then also to provide supervision sessions to advisors in organizations who will be struggling these two issues, complicated issues in their work, advising and supporting migrant workers.
That's great, thank you. That sounds like such a necessary piece of work. We've got a question from Ahmed in the chat, in the Q&A about a grants program that Mind is developing, and a question about whether Mind should make those grants 6 months rather than a year, to make sure those funds are being spent urgently. But from what you've just been saying, Susan, it sounds to me like, it's going to take, in terms of making sure migrants are benefiting from cost of living work and advice that people are doing. It's going to take a while, isn't it, to work through the system. So I wonder whether the answer is it probably should be a year rather than the 6 months.
I would always counsel against a short-term grant expenditure deadline, and the money will get spent on what you want it to be spent on. It's just that it can be very, very challenging managing multiple short deadlines like that, and you can end up with these very strange crunch periods of needing to spend money and then dry periods of it. So I understand the kind of desire for the funder that it's spent at the time that you're seeing the most need, and it will be spent, but I would really counsel against having a short-term deadline, because it makes it very, very challenging to manage in a charity. If you have more than one of those, it becomes very difficult. I don't know if you want to add to that, Susan.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, because as Geraldine said, the issues is always complex, and it always takes a long time to dwell into the whole complexity of it. And especially you're looking at, two different kind of route to justice system that you'll try to find a response to or answer to. So the long-term funding, the better, I think, for migrant.
Yeah. Yes, I would agree. Also, I would say, Ahmed, unless you've already given those grants out, you're probably going to miss winter by the time those grants do get out, if you're still making a decision on how long the grants should be. That's brilliant. Any more questions? I'm going to say that we have. You'll all remember that we did I hope you'll all remember, we launched a big piece of work, I don't know, maybe 2021, I think it was. Yes, the the funding strategy for immigration advice. And one of the things that we were saying in there was, this is, all funders ought to be thinking about the needs of migrants and about immigration advice, because it will be impacting on pretty much everything you fund. That we recognise that it's a really, really complicated area of work. It's designed to be complicated. It's designed to be hard to work your way around. But there are really great funders who are funding in this space, so who are really collaborative and would be super happy to talk to you. So if you're on the call today and you're thinking, we'd like to understand more about how our funding can we can make sure our funding is taking the needs of migrants into account, talk to Esther and Susan, come and talk to us at London Funders, and we'll put you in touch with the right people, and we'll make it as easy as possible for you to get involved in this. So these are really short, sharp sessions. So we're going to close now, but thanks everybody for spending a bit of time with us today. Huge thanks to Esther and Susan for sharing their expertise, and hope to see you all again very soon. There is another session starting in about 3 minutes on funding for advice organisations. So some of you might see some of you again in a couple of minutes. All right. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.